welcome to our Shop Talk episode of FP Next, powered by John Deere. I'm one of your co-hosts for this farmer and rancher-driven podcast, Sarah McNaughton, and I'm here with Kurt Arns.
Hi, Sarah. Yes, we are powered by John Deere, so for all of your equipment and technology needs, see your local Deere dealer.
So, Kurt, we're still having plenty of spring rains as I'm watching rain fall outside my window right now, and we're mostly enjoying how green the pastures are here in central North Dakota. How has the weather been down in Nebraska as the spring's starting to turn into summer?
Yeah, it's been water everywhere, and in many places that's been pretty welcome because we were in a pretty severe drought over the last couple of years in eastern Nebraska. So it certainly spread out the planting season, but most everything is in the ground now, at least what's going to get planted. And things are looking good. The pastures, Sarah, I'm not sure they've looked this good in several years. Things are really busted out there, and the cows are pretty happy, I think.
Yeah, I know. We didn't have hardly any snow cover this year, and so there was a lot of trepidation about if it's going to be drought or not. I think we've come out of that now, as I think a lot of people are still waiting for the ground to dry up to finish planting. As we record this, just the beginning of June. But as some of you might have listened into our episode 15 with Iowa farmer and Continuum Ag founder and CEO Mitchell Hora about how to actually get paid for carbon. With the popularity of this carbon conversation, we're diving into another one today.
Yeah, we had a great conversation with Mitchell in that episode, and we're looking forward to visiting with someone from our own team today. We've got Ben Potter, who is a senior editor at our sister publication, Farm Futures, and is our special expert guest today.
Right. I love when we get to have these great conversations with people in our own team. So, Ben is a graduate of the University of Missouri School of Journalism, like a lot of here at Farm Progress, it seems, and started off working in the agriculture industry in the world of southern row crop production. Now he continues to cover topics including agronomy, machinery, business, marketing, politics, and weather. And our topic today, of course, which is how to capitalize on carbon credits. Ben, welcome to FP Next, and thank you for joining us.
Hey, glad to be here. I'm trying to be better at promoting my content, and I think this latest feature on carbon credit programs is a great opportunity to make an extra push to do this.
Again, if Ben, if you listen to any of our podcasts with our guests, we always like to kind of talk about the food and the weather before we really get down into the meat of our conversation. So, what has the growing season been like for farmers in your neck of the woods?
We've had a generally wet spring here in Missouri. I should stipulate that I live in the Ozarks, so I actually don't live. I'm probably like 50 miles from the nearest corner soybean field. So we're here in cattle country in the Ozarks. Incidentally, we just did a best places to farm feature in Farm Futures, and there are 3,056 counties in the United States. Unfortunately, my county is ranked 2,902 out of 3,056. So we're not we're not in key farming country here, but I sure do love it here.
So, Ben, I've always heard that the barbecue in Missouri is top notch, especially coming from the north, where sometimes they call Sloppy Joe's barbecues. So, when Kurt and I inevitably go on our food tour of all of our guest recommendations, what's one of your favorite barbecue places we should go to down there?
Okay, I'll give you an answer and then I'll give you my complicated history with barbecue. My favorite barbecue place in Missouri is Arthur Bryant's. You go get the burnt end sandwich. It comes with a slice of Wonder Bread. I haven't been there in a while, but I think they used to serve it on like school lunch trays. It's a very quaint place, but it's very very good. So also my wife grew up in Memphis. And I lived in Memphis for the first 4 years of our marriage. So I have a real love of barbecue. I'm not really a Missouri purist in that sense. I love Memphis barbecue. I love St. Louis style ribs. I love Georgia mustard barbecue. Like there's just so many. If you travel around the South as much as I have, you'll find like so many great places with so many styles of barbecue.
So Ben, I'm thinking Memphis really spoiled you as far as barbecue goes. Yeah. So there you go, Sarah. Put that on our list too. So our food tour list.
Added.
Well, I suppose we should get down to our topic today. You wrote a really interesting story back in April for Farm Futures talking about how to avoid pitfalls and create opportunities to add carbon as a new revenue stream for farmers. And something I didn't realize was that the first carbon credit was started all the way back in 1988. What's that history about carbon, and what did you learn about that from your research that you did for this article?
Yeah, when I first started researching the article, I thought, yeah, carbon credits programs have maybe been around for 5 or 10 years, and I was surprised to see that it does stretch back to 1988. It was a group called World Resources Institute. It was basically like a just as you would invest in a stock, you would invest in this program basically. Then in 1989, there was a carbon offset project called Applied Energy Services, and that was going to plant 52 million trees in Guatemala for a deforestation project. And then you've probably all heard of the Kyoto Protocol in 1997. So again, it's essentially a slow burn of consumer demand for companies to be more environmentally responsible.
I know that history and background was something I didn't even realize before I read that article of yours. And so I thought it was super interesting to find out just how long this conversation's been going on. And so in that article, you talked to a Colorado farmer who's enrolled in the Locus Ag Carbon Now program. And so can you share a little bit about that farmer's experiences with our listeners?
Yeah, his name is Scott Scheimer, and I really enjoyed hearing his perspective. He gets two payouts with this program. The first is for providing historical data, and the second is for using what's called Locus Ag biologicals and providing additional data after harvest. But despite what the program Scott selected, I really appreciate his attitude for adoption. He has this kind of try before you buy attitude, and he set aside a single field on his operation to test out new products and services. Whatever works gets rolled out to the rest of the farm.
So Ben, that's probably pretty good advice to kind of start things out in the field before you jump in head first. Like in that Carbon Now program. Um, with talking about all these carbon credit programs, I mean, what do you think is the long-term viability of these farmer partnerships with those programs? Are these going to eventually go away as farmers just adopt, new carbon practices and find other ways to get paid, or do you think this is kind of something that's going to be around for a really long time?
Well, I think that's a really viable concern with everyone I talk to. And with everyone, I think every single person I interviewed, I would start by saying, well, I hate to use the cliche that it's the Wild West. And then I would immediately get interrupted and they would go, oh, it's totally like that. So there are a lot of kind of competing programs. There are a lot of options right now, and everyone's trying to figure out what works best for them. But to use another cliche, the cream rises to the top, and I think over the next decade, some programs could flame out, but others will gain footing and remain stable.
I think that's how we referred to the carbon programs in our last episode, was calling it the Wild West, because we talked about crop biologicals being the Wild West, and it seems like there's a lot of the Wild West in agriculture with some of these new things. And so also in that same carbon episode, we talked about the Truterra program and how Kurt had covered it in the past. And Ben, you also visited with a Kansas farmer who kind of played the waiting game before he ended up choosing to partner with Truterra. So what did he share with you about how he selected that program for his farm?
I think one of the biggest selling points with that farmer is that Truterra works closely with local co-ops. So the grower named Kevin Barr appreciated that added layer of trust that is built into the program. And then he also mentioned being able to talk with some end users like Campbell's Soup Company and share some of his day-to-day challenges with them. And his exact quote was, "It's good to tell our story, and we have a good story to tell."
Yeah, Ben, I interviewed Lucas Fricky, who's an East Central Nebraska farmer, a while back. I think it was in March. About he had participated in the Truterra program too, and he kept talking a lot about he was already collecting a lot of the data that he needed to participate, so it wasn't that big of a deal. But you also interviewed a farmer who maybe was perhaps the very first to capture some money from a carbon credit program. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that? I think that's kind of an interesting story.
And apologize in advance for not remembering all the details about this, but I had interviewed this guy a couple years ago also about some of his carbon credit practices. The basic story was that a online business called Shopify was having a Black Friday sale a few years back, and they wanted to showcase that they were carbon neutral during that Black Friday sale. And so they had reached out through the program that he was using at the time, and he can lay claim to the fact that he was the first farmer to get paid out for a carbon credit program.
So he was like the test guy for the whole thing. Somebody's got to start. But going back to that Truterra program, I mean, for those who have already been doing practices like cover cropping, no till, that kind of thing, there's a little controversy over whether, the long-term adopters are going to be rewarded for the practices they already did before joining a carbon program. What have you learned on that front?
I think this is a concern that was valid a few years ago, but it's not really valid anymore. So yeah, to your point, there was a big concern of the really forward-thinking growers saying, "Hey, I already plant cover crops, I already do this and that on my farm, and you want new adopters, and so like you're going to reward someone for changing their practices, but I already do it, so I won't, I don't qualify for the program." But more and more carbon credit programs are now allowing historical data into their calculations. So basically, as long as you can prove what you're doing on your operation, you won't be locked out of most programs today.
I know it's kind of like we already say, the amount of farmers who already participate in these practices is fantastic. There's no one better at being stewards of the land and its resources than our farmers and ranchers. And so I'm assuming when you're picking out programs, there are a few risks that farmers should be wary of and consider. So what's your advice for helping them select the best program?
For that question, I really have to hand it to some researchers at Iowa State University. They're keeping a mostly up to date list of the current programs that are available. They list out qualifying practices, eligible crops, contract length, payment structure, and a whole lot more. And I would hope that you would include that link in the podcast description. It was one of those things where I could have talked about that for an entire article, and I was already 3 or 4 pages deep into my feature, and I just had to link it. I felt kind of bad about that, but it really is a tremendous resource.
So, when we talked with Mitchell Hora in our previous episode, he talked a lot about carbon intensity scores. That's kind of, his take on the whole potential, within this carbon space. I mean, while there are carbon credit programs that are funded in the private sector, starting in 2025, farmers are going to get paid by the federal government to participate in programs like getting paid to deliver corn to ethanol plants if they have a favorable CI score. So tell us a little bit about how CI scores and credits are going to fit into the Biden administration Inflation Reduction Act and what farmers need to know about that.
So I was told recently by a colleague that it's refreshing that I'm willing to say I don't know about certain things. And this is one of those things where we don't know. I mean, it could be a very lucrative program, but there are critics that are worried about a lack of specifics. So, for example, theoretically, if you could drop your CI score to 0, it's worth a tax credit of $1.57 per bushel, which is significant. But that would be split between the farmer and biofuel companies, and it's not clear how that will be divided. And then, in addition to that, you can't so called double dip if you're already getting money from another carbon credit program. So basically, the legal expert that I talked to advised to just keep your eyes and ears open for now. Again, we don't know.
Sometimes that's the best thing you can do when you're dealing with the Wild West of ag, right? Just kind of see how it plays out and let it roll. So, and I just want to hit on one last part of that article, Ben, where you talk about the 7 red flags for carbon credit programs. And those red flags are unclear terms and conditions, unrealistic promises, exclusivity clauses, limited flexibility, long lock in periods, a lack of transparency, and poor reviews from peers or existing users. And so, Ben, I know that was kind of short and sweet, but thank you so much for coming on to talk on the Shop Talk episode with us. And before I forget to mention it, you kind of talked about it a little bit already, but you guys just finished a pretty massive project over at the Farm Futures team talking about the best places to farm. So can you share a little bit more about this project with our listeners and maybe even give us a few of the top places?
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that. We do this every few years, and Farm Futures actually ranks the financial performance of all 3,056 counties in the U.S. As I mentioned earlier, Phelps County, not that high ranked, but we average weighted ranks of the ratios on return on assets, profit margins, and asset turnover for each county. And what's really cool about it, I think, is that we highlighted some of the top areas. South Carolina actually was one of the best, just based on those metrics. Some parts of Iowa, but there's several features you can look into. But what's really cool is no matter where you live, you can look at your own county rankings on an interactive map. I just think that's so cool. You can just kind of tool around and see what the best places to farm in your state is based on those metrics.
We'll, of course, have that link to the best places to farm resource in the episode description for everyone to go check out. And I have the feeling we're going to be doing some more coverage on that project coming up in the future. I know for Dakota farmers, I did see a lot of green counties and as well as Nebraska and the Midwest. So we'll be definitely diving into that more, and it's exciting. And then, Ben, I have a feeling we'll be visiting with you about carbon soon, or maybe we'll be seeing you down at Husker Harvest Days there in Grand Island, Nebraska.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think carbon credit programs is just one of those sticky topics that's going to stick around, along with, my extensive drone coverage, artificial intelligence. There's so many things that are just kind of sticky topics right now. I also think some of the best advice that I got when I was researching this article was that you should probably consult with an attorney before you sign any contract. I know that's generally good business advice, but it's specifically relevant when you're about to sign up with a carbon credit program.
Yeah, that is excellent advice for